Greetings, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Hawkins STEM Chronicles. We have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Lowell Christy. And Dr. Christy, ordinarily I would want you to tell us a little bit about your background and things like that, but there's a story about when you were a little boy and you had an illness and your father, and please share that story.
Well, something that was important is I had basically every childhood disease, including polio in my legs and nephritis, etc. So I had to repeat second grade because I only went to the first 7 days of my first attempt at seventh grade, and I had to be home the rest of the time. By third grade, my dad moved to Philadelphia. He was with AT&T. He was a comptroller. They realized they had to create a new generation of thinkers to see beyond the bellhead of AT&T that could see the world as it was. And so they got the up-and-coming executives to read 200 books, to go to soup kitchens, to be able to go down to the cherry blossoms in Washington, go through the monuments, go through Congress, understand the larger world. Now that prepared, interestingly, for my dad to take from the AT&T comptroller position to when the cities blew up, and he helped create the National Alliance of Businessmen to hire the hardcore unemployed. So his mind was expanded. Well, my mind was expanded because they sent me to a Quaker school. And this was interesting. During that time, the Quakers were bringing people from Germany back to the United States to help train them, then send them back. And there was a student, Rudy, the same age as I. He came from, a place that had food that was different from me, books that had, or language that was different from me. It helped open my mind, but it gave me the idea, very different than the first teachers. First teachers saying you have to do it this way. They first said is, how do you learn in the Quaker school? How is it that you learn? And they understood that I learned differently. So they sent me down to the library and come back with the facts. And so I would give presentations to my classmates after doing the research, because that's how I learned.
Which is interesting because you've just described a system. There is a goal that you want to accomplish. Here are what elements do we need to accomplish what it is we need to accomplish? How do we link those elements together?
Right.
And you've just described a system. So there was a system in place for you learning. But it also sounds like you were part of that system. The system wasn't just acting upon you. You were part of...
You helped to create the system.
Yes.
And that ability of Quakerism. Now, Quakerism came at the end of the Protestant Revolution, going from Episcopal, Lutheran on down. It was at the radical end of Amish, Mennonites, Brethren, and Quakers, which were part of the peace churches, didn't believe in war. And what the Quakers did was saying, it's not centralized priesthood, etc., just like the Catholic Church, centralized. It was the ability to sense the world. But they didn't go to universities. They weren't allowed to go to universities in England and the continent. So they had to create their own university of life. And they had to go out. So you go to places in England where they have a bridge of like 7 different styles of bridge ornaments, because they learned how to do the iron and to create the first rocket, it was called, train that was done by compression and hydraulics, etc. So that ability to innovate and create new things, whether it be Cadbury learning how to make chocolates from the Belgians, etc., the ability to get people off of alcohol at that time through chocolates, but getting them a different way of looking at the world. But the innovators and use of science and technology. So science and technology came easily for Quakers because they were attuned to seeing differently.
Now that, not to be sectarian, but since you brought it up, one of the things that I've been reading about in working one of the things that Hawkins STEM is doing right now is that we're doing a series of hikes around the original 40 boundary stones of the District of Columbia. Prior to 1846, DC was a perfect square. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that you notice were that the people that were involved, the George Washington tasked with getting this job done, was a Quaker civil engineer, and he was a surveyor and civil engineer. But it seems as though Benjamin Banneker, some of the other people, they wanted to learn science to get things done. They were concerned with the philosophical, but they were also concerned with the practical. How do you get things done? Which again is why systems thinking is so important.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the Greeks, they had steam little engines they had as toys, mm-hmm. but they didn't use that to replace slaves. It's like the person that went with the telegraph to England and says, well, we can telegraph, connect people so communicate. And the answer was, we have enough delivery boys. And so the whole idea of a telegraph really flourished in America. Mm-hmm. And the other countries were come lately types.
Well, and that reminds me of the story you were telling about General Howe. There's formal intelligence networks and there's informal intelligence networks. And you were saying about the house, General Howe was complaining about the housewives. And you were saying, please.
They had more intelligence than their own intelligence people because we had a network, the power of a network. Mm-hmm. And that's what you see today in today's society is the power of networks and platforms that are able to connect people. The question is, why are they being connected and how is it being controlled, mm-hmm. and who controls it?
And again, another system along that same line, you remind me of Benjamin Franklin and his group creating the first postal system. Being able to not only transfer information, but goods, services via the mail.
Right. So what you had in 1776 in the American Revolution, and what you have in 2025, and then 2025 would become more British than the British were in 1776. We become more materialistic and focus on the materiality of reality than communists that would make even Karl Marx blush. And that's our consumerism that has eclipsed the citizen and the power and agency of people. So if anything that happened in terms of November this past year, people were voting for change. They're voting for a wrecking ball. The question is, what comes after destruction? Is it creative destruction? What do we build? Why does everyone think we're off track? What is on track? And it's on track is the American experiment of the agency of the people and the ability, like what you're talking about, is science in the community. Science that is enabling and empowering to everyone, because the first thing of any scientific method is observe and orient.
And that goes back to when you were a small child and you were saying that because of your illnesses, you had to spend a lot of time alone.
Yeah, so what was fascinating, how could I see, this corn on the farm in Iowa grow, how could I measure it? I'd come back and said, well, it grew 1.5 inches today. It grew this, and here was the weather. Here was the pattern, here's the cloud cover, here's the rain that influenced it. So I was able to see how everything interacted with the little seed and how it became a stalk of corn.
Please forgive me, viewer. I am feasting on some wonderful grapes and strawberries Dr. Christie's wife was kind enough to bring out. And if you could see them, you would know that they were too good to resist. But getting back, and thank you for, but going back, the idea, and I guess we could say that we do this every day, we look at things and try to analyze. And what should be, let's talk about the scientific method. Take us through that for a moment.
Well, the scientific method is very good from Francis Bacon, because he said in 1620s, when he wrote Novum Orgum, that the society was in disarray and tatters. They couldn't feed the people. People were starving. Disease was rampant. And, the people were going to what they called the idols of the mind, the idols of the cave, the psychology, idols of the marketplace and advertising. And these idols would be saying, oh, I didn't put enough milk under the bridge for the trolls that killed my daughter Jane. And so they didn't understand how things were working in terms of disease, etc. I mean, Francis Bacon died of pneumonia, putting chickens into snowdrifts at various, and looking at how fast they deteriorated or became rancid. So his observation then, he'd come up with the exact temperature you need to preserve something for a period of time. Mm-hmm. Those are things that then would create, something like Ben Franklin, his Franklin stove. You had a big fireplace going up, all the heat going up there. Well, why not contain it in a metal structure that then can radiate, around the room? It's much more efficient. You don't have to use as many logs, etc. And so, those ideas of how do you see a problem? Because the thing that we are suffering from today is the worst, most corrupting lie is a problem poorly stated. And if you look around at the world today, the problems are poorly stated, whether it be an immigrant, whether it be UFOs, whatever conspiracy theory one may want to subscribe to. But it's done very sophisticated. The idea of Cambridge Analytics and gaining people on and how they think and then manipulating how they think and see. That's the greatest thing. At the end of 1984 and George Orwell, what the main purpose of the Big Brother was for you not to believe your eyes and ears. And that was the final closure of tyranny. And so the ability to stay in your head, to stay on the screen, is what you are being designed. If you want to be a passive consumer, then the direction we're going in society is fine. It's like the Matrix, depending on what pill we take.
And yet, historically, mankind's greatest achievements when we looked outside of ourselves. We look out, we explore, we think, we put two and two together. That happens when we come outside of ourselves.
Well, that's, if you look at what Thomas Jefferson did with the Corps of Discovery. This wasn't a military corps. This was Lewis and Clark looking at the new lands they acquired from France. That's what really needs to be done. The society needs to be a Corps of Discovery, and people seeing the problems around them, not as defined by others that are trying to manipulate you and tilting the game board in their direction, but the ability to counter. So you have a representative world of the representative. That's easily compromised, and that's where we are now. The democracy is latent, is not being activated because we have no agency. We don't look around ourselves. We look at here. An example today, I was going to have a worker come here and work. He says, oh, no, it's going to rain. And I was looking at the clouds and saying, no, it's not going to rain. It'll be clouds. It hasn't rained all day. Someone looking at a screen versus looking around you.
Yes. And knowing what to look for.
Knowing what to look for. How high are the clouds? They're too high to rain right now.
Which, again, is something that our forebears understood.
It was a matter of survival. And that existential survival thing is so distant from us now that were being easily manipulated, and that's the end of civilization as we know it.
Now, one of the things that we've talked a little bit about, and I want to go back to it because I think it's so fascinating. So you did your undergrad at Vanderbilt.
Right.
And when you were at Vanderbilt, you weren't just a student, you were a student athlete.
I was a student athlete, but also a student disruptor. In the 1960s, they had the Women's Standards Committee to make sure women weren't seen during the week with pants on campus or chewing gum. At the end of 4 years, they had co-ed dorms. I put together the Free University of Nashville as an alternative to existing practical knowledge, how to do things. Mm-hmm. It dealt with Fisk, McCary, black colleges, and Peabody, the educational music school next door. That's now part of Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. But the ability to bring people together on common interest, a learning web. Those are the type of things that we experimented with to show alternatives.
Now, two ways to look at that. There's a micro way to look at that, and there's a macro way to look at that. But the idea of bringing people together so that they can not only learn together, they can learn from each other.
Well, that's the whole idea. Is what was expressed in the November election was the need for change. We're off track. Mm-hmm. People thought that the experts were telling them what to do, centralized science, etc. But science, the way we have it now, the natural sciences, is based upon analytic reductive thinking. It's the system, the larger systems that don't break down things in the laboratory. That's why I spent my life doing natural experiments about how the ecology influences the results and not just what I can control.
Now, the other thing that you talked about, which, again, going back to systems, it strikes me listening to you that you used a systems approach to your entire journey through education.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well,
especially your grad school.
Well, the ability to go from, I'll just tell you, when I was still at Vanderbilt, our chancellor called myself and my roommate up to his office, and we were both the rabble-rousers there. And his name was Alexander Hurd. And he says, well, one of our supporters, maybe financial, has been working with this guy that's creating the Hudson Conservative think tank. Mm-hmm. And Herman Kahn. He was from Rand Corporation. And he wants a new generation of thinkers for Republicans. And so he's going to all Ivy League schools, and they included Vanderbilt for some reason, to bring two people that they thought were smart together on Croydon on the Hudson sort of area up there in the north in a mansion and look at what Republican thinking could provide. So I go up there, and I had spent a lot of time memorizing Adam Smith. And they're talking about Adam Smith. And I raised my hand. I'm sorry, on page so-and-so, he said this, And finally Herman Kahn calls me over and says, hey, we know what we need to do. Don't deal with the details. We're going to get it done. And I'm now 50 years later, the ability to say they were willing to cut the edges on truth. Mm-hmm. They were looking at the pin factory, the efficiency. But in any inquisition, one of the main tools of suppression is ruthless efficiency, because you keep on going down and down. They weren't looking at the larger works of Adam Smith, where he talks about the laborer's wool coat. The laborer in fall goes to buy a wool coat, and he has a beautiful passage. The tendrils of information go up to Scotland to the sheep herder. They go down to the Thames to the mussel tongers that bring in the buttons. It goes to the chandlers that go down to the Indigo to Jamaica to dye the coat. This is a system. And they weren't looking at that. Mm-hmm. And obviously I was not invited back. and my roommate became a Fulbright scholar, went to Oxford, became head of Oxfam. Obviously not the Republican approach, but I think it's just as viable and important today of how do we bring ourselves together to be able to counter the experts, the tyranny of people thinking they have all the knowledge. Follow the bouncing ball of intelligence. America is totally exceptional because it flipped the script. It says all 3 million at 1776, all 350 million today. We're part of a huge information processing system of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not just in the computers. They can aid us. Artificial intelligence can aid us. But we need the natural and collective intelligence that looks at the larger system, not just data. Live, living systems, not what data you collect. All that tacit knowledge of how something is put together is lost when you dataize it.
Particularly when you don't ask, okay, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
Speaking of systems, so you were in grad school.
Yep.
And when you were in graduate school, you were also a contractor. You built stuff.
A licensed general bonded, contractor. So I would be doing my work, in this university, but then I'd go out and build heavy timber buildings.
Okay. Now, actually working while you're in school, what did you feel that did for you? Hindsight being 2020.
Well, it's the reason why I didn't go into academia, because I wanted to deal with real things.
Okay.
The battles in academia are so fierce because the stakes are so small. So, and right now, Harvard and others are being hit. Partially correctly because they were built as research universities to help us win the war against communism with science and technology. There are many other things that have to be done, but meanwhile, the science and technologies is centralized the expert versus the democracy where the new ideas come from the edges.
One of the things that really fascinates me about what you just said is because of where you live, and if you go back 200 years, there were a lot of people pretty much, all right, so we're outside of the District of Columbia, we're in Maryland. But you can almost draw a straight line from where we are right now. Maybe we could extend the line a little bit further north, all the way to Baltimore. And you had men who were studying science, technology, engineering, and mathematics because they wanted to do things. They had practical problems they were trying to solve, like how they were going to stay alive. They had practical problems about how they were going to get wood to build buildings from point A to point B. They had to get food. They had to do transportation because you now have cities growing, and cities that are growing outside of the larger city, the port cities. You now can't take certain goods to them by sea. You have to take it by land. So they had to figure out what that was going to look like.
So the density of interconnections is important. But the density is based upon differences. I live here in Seneca next to the Potomac River. The Potomac River was a dividing line of cultures. Just look at the sports. The sports south of me in Virginia was fox hunting, the gentlemanly arts, etc. around here. On this side, created by Germans, the ability of other Europeans and Quakers in this area, it was totally different. But like in Seneca, they asked me from the Montgomery County Historical Society to do a cultural history of Seneca. And what was interesting is, you would have a farmer on Sunday morning out in his field practicing Shakespeare, because he would then go at night to a session where he would reenact a Shakespeare. They'd be bringing in speakers all the way from Baltimore, to speak around in the local groups. It was a community organized versus a hierarchy of slavery and others. You didn't need to be able to think because you had other people to do that. Here you had to figure out how to make a new plow.
How to make a new plow, how to get the ground plowed, what crops to put in, all that.
I mean, Seneca used to be an inland port. I'm 27 miles from Georgetown. This was an inland port, and because this area was a breadbasket for the colonies, and the grinding mills of the Great Seneca Creek, there used to be about 50 various mills because it was a living stream all year round, flowing stream. And so you'd have wheat and barley and stuff from the Seneca brand down in the Caribbean. You know, so the ability was the cross-cultural. And that's where any city is an information accelerator. But we're now to the point where information has accelerated, but its question is how do you organize that information?
And the other piece of that you mentioned, that because of that, people were coming together. And maybe
it's in conversation that peer-to-peer, I learned from you and what you did at the FAA and, you know, that ability to expand my horizon. I call them ontological bridges. And Americans don't like philosophy. We're a practical people. But the American experiment is radical pragmatism, where you have to change your pragmatic lens when it no longer works. So the idea is the map or model we have of the world, when it no longer works there and gives us the bad feedback that everyone is experiencing today, it creates semantic reverberations, meaning the meanings, the world no longer makes sense. And until your model aligns with reality, those disturbances will increase.
And that, again, is incredibly important, because do you really have a solution for a problem if it's not working, if the people don't use it? And
well, to summarize the voter in November, you had people say, all the existing institutions believe in it and et cetera when they know that it's not working. Another one says, we'll tear it down. We're for change. And Americans said, things are so off track, we can't just replicate what we have done in the past. That is madness. And so the betting instinct of the voter says, we'll go with Mr. Destruction because that may have least impact. And by the way, facing a firing squad for democracy may wake it up.
Which, again, going back in history, that's, you know, sometimes you have to suffer for what it is you want, and you got to suffer for the art. Well, sir, again, I want to thank you. I feel like I've eaten enough of your wife's wonderful veggies and fruit, and this area that you've built. I got to come back out here because I just can't describe how beautiful this is. And I think the only way for the viewer to see it is to actually see it. I'll have to record it. If this is the kind of content you want to see more of, talking to real people, everyday people who have not only are in STEM, but they've actually lived a real life and are living a real life and are people who are involved with people. That's the reason why you need to come back to the Hawkins STEM Chronicles. Again, if this is something that you're interested in, please share it, please like it, and please subscribe to the Hawkins STEM Chronicles. Again, thank you.